It's way too early to talk about college football playoff seeding until you look up and TCU's the number 2 seed. Yeah, now let's talk about it. It's Locked on Horned Frogs. Play my music.
You are Locked on Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another episode of the Locked on Horned Frogs podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything TCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darrion Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, 817 Raised, as well as Who Dat Dish site expert and contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked on Horned Frogs your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is here. Visit the FanDuel app to start planning your future bets now. I'm in an analytical type of mood, so we're going to wrap up today's episode with a look at Kelly Ford's season projection, which goes game by game for TCU, which games they should win, which games are close, which games they should lose, and is that good enough to be in the playoffs? Segment 2, we'll take a look at this week's matchup versus Abilene Christian, because the biggest matchup is the running backs versus the linebackers of the Wildcats. But once again, analytical mood, that's where I'm at. Let's kick off today's episode with a look at playoff seeding. I understand the Frogs are only going into their second game, but you know what? If the season were to end today, they would be the second seed per Resume SP Plus. And this comes from a metric, which means it's just an algorithm. It's just a number system. It's no feelings. The human element that we're going to see consistently involved in the playoff seeding and things of that nature is not present when it comes to Resume SP. But Bill Connerly of ESPN created this, and it has the Frogs at number 2. Now, I think it's way too early to talk about college football playoff seeding. It's way too early to talk about who would get a bye. Matter of fact, TCU's only played one game. But when TCU is the second seed, all of a sudden my tune changes. There is a reason to talk about college football seeding. And this is interesting because the metric comes up with a 12-team playoff that I think that TCU fans would love, Big 12 fans would love, and college football fans, I'm on the fence, but I think that they would love it as well. So I thought that this would be a really interesting thing to look at. Resume SP Plus basically just goes into who you played, who you're going to play. It's just about strength of schedule. There's another metric that comes in that's SP Plus, and that's about how repeatable that your performances are. But this is Resume SP. And apparently they really like the Frogs' resume. So apparently this metric is very, how do I want to say this? It's not slanted, favorable. This is very favorable to TCU. So let's go through this playoff system, and we're going to go with the matchups and as well as who gets the bye week. So 1 through 4, you go Oregon 1, TCU 2, Florida State 3, Tennessee 4. Those are your 4 conference winners and 4 teams that are going to get a bye week. And then here goes your first round matchups. Utah versus Missouri. The winner of that would face Oregon. South Florida versus Oklahoma. The winner of that would face Tennessee. Arizona versus Washington. The winner of that would face Florida State. And then USC versus Illinois. The winner of that would face your very own TCU Horned Frogs. This is really interesting to me because I know this is nothing like what it will look like, right? If we're going to be completely real, this is cool. This is great. But there's some noticeable flaws and things that if you paid attention to college football over the last decade, you know they wouldn't let happen, such as the SEC champion is the 4th seed. I think that anything is possible. You never want to rule anything out. But realistically, I know, they're not letting the SEC champion be the last automatic qualifier. They're not going to let the SEC champion be the last team with a bye week. They're not doing that, right? Like, let's just be realistic. The SEC has favoritism towards them. It always has. SEC fans are going to love that. Non-SEC fans are going to hate that. But college football fans are going to understand that this is what it is. And I don't think that Tennessee, if they win the SEC, would be the 4th seed, right? And I don't think that TCU, if they win the Big 12, would be the 2 seed, because just like the SEC gets a lot of favoritism, I would say that the Big 12 is the one that gets kicked to the curb. The Big 12 is the team that gets, or the conference that doesn't get the nod most times. They don't get a lot of shine. They don't get a lot of love or praise or really applauded. They're just existing. I think that if you're going by public perception, the Big 12 is kind of like that 4th team out. They are a part of the Power 4, but everybody talks about the SEC and the Big 10. And I think that the ACC has Clemson over the last few years that has risen up and had great seasons. So those are the conferences that everybody talks about. Now, the Pac-12 has been demolished, and, they don't have the blue bloods like USC and UCLA. Like, they don't have these huge brands. And you look at the Big 12, they lost their big brands with Texas and Oklahoma, who were, flagships of the conference. So a lot of times you're not going to get that nod as a conference of being this great team or this great conference, great collection of teams. But TCU's number 2 in this. That counts for something. It says that we really like what you did against North Carolina. We think that you have a solid resume of opponents coming up. It's a great, great, great green flag for the conference, because not only is TCU number 2, which means you had quality within your collection. That's number 1, because you don't get high seeding unless you have quality in your collection. But then also, they're not the only Big 12 team present. You also have Arizona on this list. You also have Utah on this list. I'm kind of surprised that you don't have BYU on this list, but resumes, right? If this were to happen, I think college football fans will be really excited. I think they would, because one thing that I know college football fans have clamored for, they have clamored for diversity. They have clamored for new teams in the college football playoffs. We don't always want the same old, same old. We want new. Well, let's go through it. Missouri, is that new enough for you? Utah, is that new enough for you? South Florida, is that new enough for you? Oklahoma, I know that they have a nice brand, but overall, I mean, they kind of iffy over the college football playoff era, But let's say that that's solid. Arizona, is that new enough for you? Washington, they were around, but I don't think that they're one of these schools that teams that fans are tired of. USC, once again, big brand. I don't know if they're tired of them. Illinois, pretty new for you. And I like Fran. I really do like their coach. Oregon, that's someone who's been around consistently. And I do think people are a little tired of them, but you need those guys. Tennessee, not really been around a lot. Florida State, I almost feel like the sympathy of them being cheated out of, depending on what metric you look at with the whole quarterback being gone, being cheated out of a spot. That's one of the big reasons we talk about expansion. And I think that a lot of people feel bad for them. So I don't think anyone's complaining, and someone has to come out the ACC, and then TCU, I know that they were in the championship not too long ago, but I would argue that, I think you would argue the same. It's not like they're talked about all day, every day on every platform. So heck, they just had a big time game against North Carolina, and they were never talked about leading up to it. So that's really new. That's something that I think college football fans would be pretty excited about. You have teams like Oregon, teams like Oklahoma, teams like Florida State and USC, right? These are nice brands. These are brands that could give you star power, which it's a business. So at the end of the day, you're going to want a lot of star power. You have smaller schools that have big fan bases. You have, rich traditions at different schools, but Florida State, Oklahoma, Oregon, those are, USC, those are schools that have extreme national appeal. So you have that grounded nature in there. I know it doesn't have a Georgia, an Alabama, an LSU, an Ohio State, a Michigan, right? A Clemson isn't there, a Miami isn't there, but you have some schools with enough national luster to where you can have some oomph to this college football playoff while also having some switch up, a change of pace. I think fans would love it. Big 12 fans would see 3 of their schools in there. They don't get that nod often. So analytics say that TCU is on their way to being the 2nd seed in the college football playoffs. It's crazy. It's important to know, like I said, I don't think this is happening because, come on, You have 2 SEC schools. You have 3 Big 12 schools. The favoritism of the SEC is not going to let that happen. It just isn't. Right. So they're going to find a way to get that third SEC team in there. But I'm not through with analytics. We're going to come in at the end of the episode and we're going to wrap it up with some more analytics that they're future focused, but they're not as future focused. It's more of a game by game breakdown as opposed to being a what happens at the end of the year. But I thought this was really interesting. Resume SP Plus says that TCU is your second seed to be. Second seed. We're going into our second game, but Resume SP Plus says that TCU, if the season were to end today, would be your number 2 seed in the playoffs. I don't think anybody's more excited about that than Frogs fans, but yeah, shout out to the Big 12 podcast because I wouldn't have got this without Drake. And I was just checking it out and this popped up and I said, man, this is something cool. Let me put a little frog flip on it. And here we are. TCU elated. Big 12 prideful. College football fans finally get something new. Who's complaining about this? I know it isn't you, but if you think anybody, let me know in the comments. But let's keep pushing forward. We're going to come back with analytics at the end. But right now, let's put another focus on this week 2 matchup or week 3 matchup versus Abilene Christian and focus on the biggest head-to-head matchup that you'll see in this game as we continue with Locked On Horned Frogs. Today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. It's almost the weekend, and it's time to look back and crown this week's MVP, who delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered the most, so let's break it down. For TCU, Jordan Dwyer delivered in a major way. He had a long touchdown. He had multiple big-time catches, and he was the leading receiver for the Horned Frogs. When the pressure was on early, he was one of those players who delivered. And if you've been watching week after week or listening week after week, you know that Dwyer is a guy who will perform and who will step up for the Horned Frogs. And just like Dwyer delivered for the Frogs, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season, and you can save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day. Only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On College Football. You want to know everything that's going on around not just the Big 12, but the entire country. Locked On College Football is your spot to be. Also, real quick, before we get into this Abilene Christian matchup head-to-head, Texas A&M posted something over the weekend saying that they were the only program with 0 losses, football, golf, cross country, number 1, volleyball, soccer. They're naming all these sports. They ain't had no losses. Well, shout out to TCU soccer because they gave Texas A&M their first loss of the fall season. And I was looking at the TCU versus Texas A&M game. I was like, oh man, is TCU gonna give them their first loss in volleyball too? No, because SMU actually beat A&M the night prior, but TCU came in and gave them another loss. So anytime that we can laugh at Texas A&M, I think that we should. So this is the point where they rolled the laugh track in the sitcom, and everybody laughs at the Aggies because you had no losses and now you have 3. Anyway, and I hope you lose on Saturday. I don't know who A&M plays on Saturday, but I hope they lose that game too. But let's get into TCU versus Abilene Christian. All of this wishing on Texas A&M. Let's not have the Horned Frogs get caught slipping against Abilene Christian. But the matchup that I'm really highlighting is the Wildcat linebackers versus the Horned Frogs running backs. And if I had to really break it down to one individual versus one individual, it would be Schaefer versus Barnes. Because when you look at that linebacker room, they have some guys. I have a colleague who, obviously I was working in the FCS world for a long time, but I had a friend who covers everything FCS. So I asked him, I said, hey, what can you tell me about Abilene Christian? TCU's face them this week. I'm not overly familiar with them. What can you tell me about Abilene Christian to look out for? And the very first thing he said is that linebacker room is really expletive good. That was the very first text message that he sent, right? And to me, if you're going to talk about a team, if I ask you and you tell me, if I ask you to tell me what you know about TCU, hey, I'm new to TCU. What could you tell me about the team? Whatever the first thing to come out of your mouth, whatever the first thing that you text is probably either the most impressive or the most important, right? Like when it comes to teams, quarterback is the most important. So that may be the first thing you name no matter what. But if you name the linebackers first, that's not a premier position. That's not a position that a lot of people are going to jump around talking about in excitement. So for linebacker to be the first thing that my guy told me, to say they have a really expletive room or expletive good room, spoke volumes to me. It did. And he followed that up with Will Schaffer is the guy. Is it Schaefer or Schaffer? I can't remember right now. But it's Schaffer. I think it's Schaffer. But I'm going to call him Will to be safe, because I think I called him Schaefer the first time and I said Schaffer. And now I have confused myself on which one was correct, as if I didn't look it up before. But anyway, said that Will is the guy. That top linebacker is the guy to watch. And you go look at his numbers. He was 8th in the country in 2024 in tackles with over 120 of them. Tackling machine. He gets downhill, had 9.5 tackles for a loss. He had 2 sacks to go with that and 5 pass breakups. So a real do-it-all type of linebacker. Somebody who can fly around, someone who can come downhill, someone who can drop back in coverage, get hands on the ball. He can impact you in a lot of different ways. Today, we're going to focus on what Will does as a run defender. We're going to focus on him versus Barnes. Now, I do think it's the entire linebacker room. I do think it's the entire linebacker room versus the entire running back room. But 1-to-1, Schaffer versus Barnes. Because you're looking at a TCU team that's going to look to run the football. At the end of the day, they're going to look to establish the run. And I expect that the linebackers will be heavily involved because they are very downhill. In addition to Will Schaffer, you also have Rayshawn Miles Jr. Rayshawn Miles Jr. has 21 tackles, just like Schaffer does. They both have 21 tackles on the season. So, sorry, I just realized I said his last name again, and it distracted me. But you're looking at that linebacker duo. The linebacker duo is going to come downhill. They're not going to be guys who are floating parallel. I'm not really a big fan when I see my linebackers floating parallel to the line of scrimmage. Like there's a place for it, but I like to be downhill to really downhill, because sometimes you see linebackers who they want to go up and around the offensive lineman. I don't know. Like you can go parallel, but don't go backwards. Don't go backwards. If you're going to play linebacker, read your keys, take your pats, and get to the football. But trying to go around, that's longer. To me, I like downhill, diagonal. But you can do some sideways. But anyway, we're getting too deep into all of this now. Let's get into the linebackers. When I talk about the guy, Will Schaffer, anyway, when you talk about Will, it's not just what he did last year. He's done really well this year too. One thing you can't say about Abilene Christian is that they don't have a good out-of-conference schedule. Not every FCS school does. A lot of times you see a play up, so they might go against an FBS team, and you may see a play down, go against a D2 team. You'll see that from time to time. But Abilene Christian has done really well. They played Tulsa. They played SFA, which is a top 25 team, or was a top 25 team. The loss knocked them out of it. But that was a top 25 matchup between Abilene Christian and Stephen F. Austin. And you had that game, excuse me. And now you have the TCU matchup. So that's 2 FBS schools and a top 25 game on the FCS level. That is, to me, a really good start to the season. And guess who had a really good start to the season in those games? You have Schaefer, who has 9 tackles versus Tulsa. Versus SFA, he has 12 tackles and a tackle for a loss and a pass breakup. So he's showing the things that you saw from him in 2024. He just hasn't gotten a sack yet, but he's a downhill player. He's going to be very aggressive. Number 1, you can look out for him. 1 and 14. Those are the linebacking numbers. And then you have 5 running backs for TCU, and I think that's a good thing. I talked about how the distribution will be heavily spread out, and I don't think you'll have a 20 carry back. And I still maintain that, but one of the reasons I said it is because I think you'll be up big. But let me change this a little bit. Not that I don't think they'll win big, but because TCU will also probably use a variety approach as opposed to a bell cow at the beginning of the game. So those are just ways that I think that you'll see it come into play, whether it's Battle, whether it's Palmer, whether it's Barnes, right? It could be anybody. You have a variety of running backs that you could use, and I expect you to use all of them. You want to stay fresh. That's what the benefits of a 5-man rotation are. When you like 5, when you like 3, 4 of your running backs, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be all 5. When you really like 3 or 4 of your running backs, you can stay fresh because you don't need Barnes to be the bell cow 30 carry, 25 carry guy. We can use him heavily in the first quarter. You want to keep a rhythm with your top guys, but you use him heavily in the first quarter. Then you can step into the second quarter and maybe not use him as much. Or, he need a little bit of a breather. We can give that to him. Talked about that with Kamori and Pimpton. When you have options, you don't have to rush anybody either into the game or keep them from having breaks and being exhausted. You don't have to do that when you have multiple options. And that's what TCU does have. So as we push forward, though, we're going to look at some more analytics, go a game-by-game breakdown of what it is that TCU is facing in 2025, because the Kelly Ford breakdown gives you the likelihood of a victory for each game. And that analytic is really in favor of TCU as well. So let's look at that as we continue and close out today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs. Today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. And Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride and with more IIH Top Safety Pick awards than anyone else. As of August 2025, you can go look at that company and that company. I ain't naming them because I don't really care about them. Mazda is the place to be. I'm in the mood for a new car, and trust and believe I've been looking at the Mazdas exclusively. From the footwork to the breath work, athletes sweat all of the details. So why wouldn't Mazda? Why wouldn't you want your car to do that as well? Mazda brings that same intention in how we craft every model. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. So like our players, we sweat every single detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, and football season is here. It's here. Frogs are here. Whatever your pro team is here. Got a phenomenal Thursday night game tonight if you want to put some money on. I don't like putting money on things that I care deeply about. I like putting money on things that I'm not emotionally invested in. Now, all of a sudden, you hoping that your lead running back gets 5 more yards when you need to pass the football. So I like betting on games that I don't really care about. You can do that with tonight's matchup versus the Commanders, or of the Commanders versus the Packers. Or you can wait till basketball season. It ain't too far away. You can wait till Sunday. You can wait till Monday. You can wait till next week. It doesn't matter, but I would jump on it quick, because right now FanDuel is offering $300 in bonus bets to new customers who put down a winning $5 bet. Now, this is rare. They don't do this often, so I would get on it ASAP. $300 in bonus bets goes back to you if your first $5 bet wins. Go to FanDuel.com and make every moment more. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. More analytics. I like themes, guys. I'll be honest with you. I'm a real big thematic guy. If I can tie an episode together, I will tie an episode together. And I was able to do that with analytics today. I know we talked about the trap game, but I already had 2 segments for that, and I knew I kind of wanted to do a theme of analytics. So I just moved the trap game to tomorrow. And honestly, the pregame, or the last episode before the game, makes sense to have it be an avoid the trap game. But also, we're going to be talking about how this matchup is really good for the Hoover Heisman hype. Excuse me. But today, we're going to look at the win-loss projections for Kelly Ford, or from Kelly Ford. And we're not going to give the percentage for every single game, but we're going to group teams together, because just giving the numbers, that's too much. You can go on my social media, you can find those numbers. I have them retweeted and put it out. I'll retweet it again now so that it's fresh on my timeline. But anyway, one of the things here is we've already looked at the playoff seeding by Resume SP Plus, but now I want to look at these analytics and see if the end of the season could result in playoffs for the Horned Frogs if it played out this way. This is not my predicting who wins this game, who wins that game, or anything like that. This is focusing on what Kelly Ford says is going to happen or is most likely to happen. Is that enough? They're favored in every single game except for the BYU matchup. Every single game for the rest of the season. This happened on September 3rd, but I don't think enough things have happened to change that. I don't think so. TCU is favored to finish 11-1 in the season. To me, if you have a 70% chance of victory, that's a pretty good chance. And I want to go through the teams that they have 70% chances with. So you have SMU, Colorado, Baylor, West Virginia, UH, Cincinnati, and Abilene Christian. Now, obviously, that's 7 games right there. You already won 1 versus North Carolina. So that's, I don't call them easy wins, but that's 1 already won in 8 pretty sure things. Now, Abilene Christian is 99%, and they have a watchability score. That's the only one that's super low. The other one that's close is Colorado. A lot of people aren't high on how good that game will be. I'm actually very excited for that matchup with the history and, all of the things that go with that, with the Deion train. It's been a while since I had Deion to talk about, to be honest. Obviously I was on Locked on HBCU and he was around at the time that I was around. So that was always fun. It'd be interesting to see what Deion Colorado fans are like as opposed to Deion Jackson State fans. But but that's an 85% win right there. That's an 85% win. And I don't think that Martin Luther Staub is going to be changing those percentages too much. We'll see how he looks in his first start, though. Anyway, Baylor. This is before Baylor beat SMU. So I would assume that the SMU odds probably went up. I was surprised that it was already at 71 anyway, but they probably went up. And the Baylor odds probably went down a little bit, but I don't think it went down by much. It wouldn't shock me if it was still in 71. Kelly Ford website says that they update this weekly. I couldn't find it. Maybe I'm not the most technologically savvy at times. So maybe I just didn't realize it or I didn't know how to find it, but I could not find where the update was. So I'm going based off the thing that happened September 3rd because TCU still hasn't played a game. So it feels, largely relevant to me. Anyway, so those are your 70 plus games. And then you have your Iowa State at 69. Iowa State at 69 is kind of a aberration. It stands alone, I should say, because no other game, it's not above 70%, but it's not also close to the other games. And these are toss-ups to me, right? So you have Arizona State, Kansas State, and BYU. I'm sure some of those percentages have changed because 2 of the 3 have lost. Arizona State lost to an unranked Mississippi State. Kansas State has lost to Army. I think they had already played the first game by then, but they lost to Army now. So you're looking at 2 teams where you had a 59% chance of beating Arizona State, a 53% chance of beating Kansas State. I would imagine that those probably have crept into the 60s, if I had to imagine. And the reason they're low is because they're on the road. Now, you look at Arizona State, Kansas State, BYU, you would think that Iowa State would be around that group. You would think that the percentages would be around the same. But Iowa State has a 69% chance of victory. 69%. Much closer to games that I feel confident about than games that feel like toss-ups. And I think a lot of that has to do with venue. You're in the Carter. Other games you're on the road. And I think that matters. I think that plays a part. But BYU at 44% is the only game that you're not favored in. Now, let's turn that and let's say that you win all of those games. Let's say the toss-ups, you still win because, 53 still slanted towards you. If TCU wins every game except for BYU, is that enough to make the playoffs? That's a really interesting question to me. If TCU wins every game in the regular season except for beating BYU, is that good enough to make the college football playoffs? And it's a tough question to answer because, one, what does Utah do? Because if it's TCU versus BYU in the Big 12 championship again, well, you're going to have to win that game. You don't win that game, you're not making the playoffs. But let's say it's a BYU versus Utah Big 12 championship. Let's say Utah and BYU face off in the Big 12 championship and BYU wins again. So BYU gets the automatic bid for the conference. Is an 11-1 season from TCU with no appearance in the Big 12 championship good enough? Once again, difficult one to answer, because I would say the way that the Big 12 is treated as a conference, probably not. They don't tend to get favoritism. They get the short end of the stick. You look at last year, you have 12 teams in the playoffs. You have an independent in Notre Dame. You have a G5 that's mandatory. You have 3 SEC schools, 4 Big 10 schools, 2 ACC schools, and 1 Big 12. I honestly could see that happening again. That exact distribution. Maybe the SEC has 4, the Big 10 has 3, but I can see the Big 10 and the SEC accounting for 7 schools in the college football playoffs again. So now the question becomes, can an 11-1 TCU kick out one of those Big 10 teams, one of those SEC teams? This is assuming that Notre Dame continues to perform because they play an independent schedule and they tend to get that love. That's tough to me, because as I go through and knowing how these conferences are treated, the ACC had 2. Is it unrealistic to say that Clemson, Florida State, and Miami, of those 3, 2 of them will make it? I don't think it's unrealistic. Is it unrealistic to say that you'll have 7 schools from the Big 10 and SEC combined? I'm talking Georgia, LSU, Tennessee. Oklahoma's kind of on the rise a little bit. I don't know how I feel about that right now. That's 4 out of there. South Carolina, Oregon, Penn State. I'm sure there's something that I'm just catching a brain fart on right now because I'm at 6. But I know that there's Ohio State. I knew, like I'm saying, brain fart. Is it crazy to say that Texas couldn't make some noise again? Right? Like, is it crazy to say these things when it comes to the Big 10 and the SEC, and knowing that those are the conferences that get the most love? This is how it is. This is how it is. I would like to see multiple Big 12 teams get in. I think it's much easier if Notre Dame has a rough season. I think it's much easier to do that. But does an 11-1 TCU get in? That's the question. I don't know if I have the answer to that. It's way too early to say. Let's see TCU go 11-1 first. But it's interesting. The Kelly Ford projection has TCU ending the season at 11-1 with 1 loss to BYU. If that is how the season ends, I think there's a good chance that TCU sees themselves in the playoffs. I would say it's probably like 50-50, to be honest. But on tomorrow's episode, we'll be breaking down the Hoover Heisman hype as well as avoiding the trap game. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.